All right, let's jump right in, shall we? Today, we're taking a deep dive into Original Gangsters, a film that I'm sure many of you remember, a 1996 action flick.
Yeah, definitely a cult classic.
It's got this really interesting blend of classic blaxploitation vibes with that gritty 90s aesthetic.
Exactly. It's like a time capsule of those two distinct eras of black cinema, you know.
Yeah.
You've got the stylish swagger of the 70s mixed with the hardcore reality of the 90s. It's fascinating how they come together.
We're basing our deep dive today on a YouTube essay from Prim's Hood Cinema, a channel that really gets into the nitty-gritty of these kinds of
Oh,
movies.
yeah, I've seen their stuff. They always have interesting takes.
So, Original Gangsters sets the scene in Gary, Indiana, which, for those who don't know, was once a booming industrial city but had fallen on hard times by the 90s.
Right. And that setting is really important. Gary becomes like a character itself, representing the decline of the American dream and the struggles of black communities.
It adds this layer of social commentary to the film, showing how economic hardship and lack of opportunity can fuel violence and despair.
Definitely. It's not just a mindless action flick. There are deeper themes at play here.
So, in this struggling city, we meet Kenny, a promising young basketball player with a bright future ahead of him.
Yeah, he's got a scholarship to UCLA. Everything's looking up for him. And then
Tragedy strikes. He gets caught in the crossfire of gang violence and is killed.
it's a classic story, really. Dreams being shattered by the harsh realities of the streets. But in this case, it sets off a chain of events that brings the older generation back into the fray.
Exactly. Kenny's godfather, played by Fred Williamson, who, by the way, is blaxploitation royalty, decides to come back to Gary to avenge his godson's death.
Oh, yeah, Fred the Hammer Williamson, he's an icon.
And he's not alone. Kenny's mother, played by Pam Grier, another legend, joins him in this fight against the new generation of gangsters terrorizing the city.
It's like the old guard is stepping back into a world they thought they'd left behind to face a new breed of criminal.
And the casting here is really deliberate. Bringing in these icons of blaxploitation cinema adds this whole other layer to the story.
Totally. It's like they're carrying the torch, passing the legacy on to a new generation. But at the same time, they're also confronting how much things have changed, how the game has evolved.
And Original Gangsters definitely isn't afraid to embrace its over-the-top nature. The reviewer actually points out how some of the fight scenes are almost laughably unrealistic, describing them as sluggish and overacted.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like they're winking at the audience, acknowledging that they're not going for straight realism.
It's almost like they're playing with those old kung fu movie tropes, where the sound effects and the reactions are as important as the moves themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. It adds to the fun, the entertainment value. It's like, we know this is over the top, but just go with it and enjoy the ride.
Right. It's not taking itself too seriously. And speaking of standing out, the reviewer specifically mentions Bay Area rapper Drew Down as being a real scene stealer.
Oh, interesting. I haven't seen the film in a while, but I do remember him. He definitely had a presence.
Yeah, the reviewer even suggests that he outshines some of the more established actors in the film, like Jim Brown and Richard Roundtree.
Wow, that's saying something.
Makes you wonder what it is about his performance that makes him so captivating.
Could be that raw charisma, that natural ability to command attention on screen. Sometimes experience isn't everything.
On the flip side, the reviewer wasn't quite as convinced by Braxton from the Jamie Foxx show as a gang leader. Found him a little too, well, sitcom-y for the role.
Ah, yeah, I can see that. It's hard to shake off that comedic persona when you're trying to be menacing.
Exactly. It kind of raises questions about the tonal balance of the film. Like, is it trying to be a serious commentary on gang violence, or is it leaning into a more lighthearted, almost satirical approach?
It's definitely a tricky balance. And casting choices like that can definitely affect how the audience perceives the film's message.
Yeah.
And, one thing that kind of jumps out at you in this movie is how it portrays this clash between the old school gangsters and the young punks.
Oh, yeah. The reviewer definitely picks up on that. He actually calls Original Gangsters a boomer power fantasy, where the older generation basically shows these youngsters how it's done.
Yeah, there's this one scene where Black Dynamite literally tells some gang members to pull their pants up.
Oh, man, that's classic. It's like a direct commentary on this idea that the youth of today have lost respect for authority and tradition.
Right, and it kind of makes you think, is the movie being ironic, or is it genuinely pushing this message of respecting your elders and returning to traditional values?
It's tough to say for sure, but it definitely adds another layer to the film's social commentary.
And then there's this interesting contrast between how Black Dynamite's crew used to be a protection gang looking out for the community.
But now the gangs are all about drive-bys and violence with no sense of responsibility.
Exactly. It highlights how gang culture has evolved over time, becoming more ruthless and less connected to any kind of moral code.
There's this one line that I love where Black Dynamite's old friend Jake, who's a retired boxer, is talking about how kids today don't want to work. They just want easy money.
And what does Black Dynamite say?
He says with a totally straight face, the hood needs dabs way more than they need old karate expletive.
Oh man, that's brilliant. It's like the film is acknowledging its own absurdity while also slipping in this really poignant message about the importance of fatherhood and mentorship.
It's like they're saying, yeah, we can have all the fun and action, but let's not forget the real issues underlying all this violence.
Exactly. The film manages to entertain while also prompting you to think about the bigger picture.
Okay, but we can't forget about the mustaches. I mean, the reviewer was obsessed with the mustaches in this movie.
Oh yeah, he was all about them.
Yeah.
He said something like, literal every character has a big-ass mustache.
It's definitely a stylistic choice. And, it kind of adds to that blaxploitation vibe, that sense of exaggerated coolness and swagger.
Right. It's like they're saying, we're not going for realism here, folks.
Yeah.
This is all about style and attitude.
And then, of course, we got to talk about the climax. The rebels, led by this dude named Spyro, decide to just burn down the entire city.
Yeah, talk about going all out. It's like they're embracing pure chaos and destruction.
It shows how far gone they are, how lost they are in this cycle of violence and revenge.
And it all leads to this epic showdown between the old schoolers and the young punks. It's like a battle of generations with Fred Williamson and his crew armed with brooms and canes, taking on a whole gang of heavily armed thugs.
But the reviewer was dying laughing, calling it insanely funny.
Yeah, it's that perfect blend of action and comedy. It's so over the top you can't help but laugh.
But amidst all the chaos, there's this really powerful moment where Black Dynamite confronts Spyro about being a deadbeat dad.
Oh yeah, that's a key scene.
Yeah.
It brings it all back to the issue of responsibility and the consequences of neglecting your family.
It's like the movie is saying that violence often stems from a lack of positive role models and a breakdown of family structures.
And that's a really important message, especially in the context of gang violence.
So in the end, the reviewer gives Original Gangsters a 7 out of 10, praising its entertainment value and its surprisingly nuanced take on social issues.
Yeah, it's a movie that defies easy categorization. It's cheesy, it's action-packed, it's thought-provoking. It's just a whole lot of fun.
So after all that, after diving into this crazy world of Original Gangsters, what do you think? What's the takeaway here?
Well, I think it shows you that even a movie that's totally over the top and kind of cheesy can still have something to say about real-world issues. Like we talked about fatherhood and responsibility and the challenges facing Black communities.
Yeah, and it makes you think about how things have changed, how gang culture has evolved over time. It's not just about looking cool and being tough anymore.
It's a different world now.
Well,
And I
yeah.
think the movie captures that shift in a really interesting way.
It also makes me wonder, if we were suddenly dropped back into the neighborhoods we grew up in, how would we react? Would we be the Black Dynamite clinging to the old ways? Or would we be more like the younger generation trying to find our own path?
It's a tough question, right? Because on one hand, you have this nostalgia for the past, for a time when things seem simpler. But on the other hand, you have to adapt to the present and face the challenges of today.
It's like the movie is saying that there's no easy answer. It's about finding a balance between respecting the past and embracing the future.
Exactly. It's about learning from those who came before us, but also forging our own path.
So if you're looking for a gritty, realistic crime drama, Original Gangsters probably isn't for you. But if you want a movie that's fun, action-packed, and surprisingly thought-provoking, then give it a shot.
Yeah, it's a wild ride, a total blast from the past.
Yeah.
And you might just find yourself thinking about it long after the credits roll.
And here's one last thing to ponder. The director of Original Gangsters, Larry Cohen, also directed that thriller Phone Booth, which is a totally different kind of movie.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Colin Farrell trapped in a phone booth. Talk about intense.
So it makes you wonder, are there any connections between those two films? Any thematic threads that run through Cohen's work?
That's an interesting thought. Maybe he's exploring themes of confinement and isolation in both films in different ways.
Something to think about anyway. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into Original Gangsters for today. We hope you enjoyed the trip back to 1996.
It was a blast.
Yeah.
And as always, keep exploring those cult classics, folks. You never know what gems you might uncover.
Until next time, keep diving deep.